Thank you for joining me, everyone. This is a pharmacy-specific webinar. It's a copy of the presentation I gave at Pharmacy Connect last week. Oh, it's all a blur. I only just got home from Sydney yesterday. We'll make a start. Friction blisters are more common than people think. They are historically misunderstood and they're not managed very well. So basically what I want to let you know is you're in for a bit of a wild ride if you're a pharmacy assistant or a pharmacist and haven't really gone into the whole friction blister issue before. This is going to be quite surprising, I think it's fair to say. So my idea for this session is to help pharmacists and pharmacy assistants make the most appropriate product recommendations based on three things: the 5 blister stages, what really causes friction blisters because it's not what you think, and how the products you offer actually work. So just very quickly about me, my special interest in blister management began in 2008. At that point, I'd been a podiatrist for 15 years and I found myself in the awkward position of being unable to fix my own foot problem. So my biggest blisters were back of heel blisters on my 30-minute walks, and they got to the point where they were persistent and debilitating in spite of my best efforts. And then in hockey season, I'd get edge blisters on my big toe knuckle. And it basically boiled down to the fact that I could put tape, moleskin, and hydrocolloids on these areas and still get blisters. And I couldn't figure out why, because in my mind, I'd eliminated the friction, the cause of the blisters, which is the rubbing. So basically, I knuckled down and read all the research. What I found was surprising. I put a few articles on a website that kind of took off, made some videos, same thing. And I started volunteering at 6-day ultramarathons because 99% of that is blister management. And that actually proved to be the very best way to learn, because I could get feedback every lap as to what was working and what wasn't working. And if it wasn't working, I would literally have to find a way to make it work. So nowadays, I'm still a full-time practitioner in my private practice in WA. I still do all the blister website video type stuff and go to ultramarathons. And I educate podiatrists, sports medicine practitioners, and pharmacists and pharmacy assistants on friction blister management. So let's get into the 5 blister stages and see what we need to do in terms of product recommendations at each stage. So ideally, we start and we finish blister-free. If we don't do enough to stop the blister causing forces at a particular part of our foot, then we will feel the hot spot sensation. It's actually pretty subtle and brief, but it's our last chance for prevention. If we don't do enough to stop the blister causing forces at this area, then we are going to end up with a blister, and he'll start off with his roof intact. Now, the good thing about this blister is it can't get infected because the intact skin is keeping the germs out. But if we're not doing enough to stop the blister causing forces here, then the roof will tear. And the bad thing about this one is now it's open to infection. If we don't do enough to stop the blister causing forces here, then the roof will slough right off and we'll be left with a D-roof blister. Now, you tell me, but I think it's fair to say that 9 times out of 10, if someone walks into pharmacy with a friction blister issue on their foot, they're going to walk out with a hydrocolloid, probably Compeed, to stop the rubbing on the skin. But is rubbing actually the problem? Do this with me, guys. Get your fingertip, pop it on the back of your opposite hand, and keep it stuck to that same bit of skin. Now, wobble it back and forth as far as it can go without letting it slip. That looks a lot like rubbing, doesn't it? But if you look closely, nothing is actually rubbing across the skin surface because we've got this stuck to there. But what is happening is everything in between, all this soft tissue, is stretching and distorting. That's called shear, and that's what causes friction blisters. Now, the problem is when we think it's all about rubbing, we think, let's stick something to the skin and we'll eliminate the rubbing, which you will eliminate the rubbing. But what you probably don't realize is shear is still happening to the soft tissues underneath the hydrocolloid. So that by spreading it out over a larger area, we've actually reduced peak shear at the bony prominence by a little bit. However, and that probably explains why hydrocolloids can work for some people. But the fact that we're not eliminating it explains why it doesn't work for other people like me.
What I'll do is, oh yes, hello.
Erica?
Yep. Excuse me one moment, I'll be with you just a sec.
Yeah, I'll just mute you, sorry. Okay, so it may surprise you when I say that hydrocolloids are actually intended to be used on the last blister stage only, on D-roof blisters. They're an ulcer dressing. They're designed for shallow, mild to moderately exudating wounds, and they need full contact with the wound base to work their healing magic. So if we look at the performance of hydrocolloids over the 5 blister stages, as I said before, they're minimally effective, or they're somewhat effective as a blister prevention for the first 2 stages. Remember, we're just spreading shear out, we're not eliminating it. The problem is when it doesn't work is we end up with a blister underneath a hydrocolloid, stage 3. And we should never put hydrocolloids on stage 3 or 4 blisters, because it almost always makes it worse. When your patient goes to take their hydrocolloid off, it rips the whole blister roof off with it, effectively worsening their blister situation. So hydrocolloids are really intended to be used in their most effective way for D-roof blisters. And when you think about that, they really must be provided sterile, but not all brands are. So what would the perfect hydrocolloid look like? Well, in my opinion, each plaster would be individually wrapped and sterile for the reasons I mentioned. It would have helpful instructions for use, showing people which blisters to use it on, which blisters not to use it on, and also what to expect. So I get messages from people when they see that white gel bubble form, which is just the wound fluids combining with the hydrocolloid particles and doing its thing. That's expected behaviour, but people aren't expecting it, and they freak out and they think that their blister is infected, especially when they take it off and see all the goo under there. But that is completely normal. So we need to set expectations there. And the other thing it would have would be the fixation tape. No matter what the brand of hydrocolloid, from Duoderm all the way down, rollback is common. And for that reason, we need to anchor the edges with fixation tape. And when you think about it, hydrocolloids are meant to be in place for days at a time. So that means there are multiple episodes of donning and doffing of footwear that risk catching a edge of the plaster and kind of peeling it back and compromising its action. So that's why if you went to a podiatrist or a wound care specialist, we would never slap a hydrocolloid on your foot and send you on your way. We would always anchor the edges with fixation tape. And I can't see why we can't provide this in the packet of hydrocolloids that we're selling to our customers. It's worth noting that it's not ideal to put fixation tape across the whole plaster, because what we want to see is that white gel bubble, because when it works its way to the edge, that's when we know, to the edge of the plaster, that's when we know we need to change the blister dressing. And I do want to give a shout out to Elastoplast. Their recent hydrocolloid product, they have fantastic product photography and videos of that white gel bubble, making a real feature, showing that that's really expected behavior. Unfortunately, they don't have it on their packaging, but in their sort of social media that I've caught hold of, it's really, really good. So kudos to them. So they're the 3 things that a good hydrocolloid really should have, in my opinion. And for that reason, we created our own BlisterPod hydrocolloids. BlisterPod is my brand. That has the individually wrapped and sterile plasters. It includes the fixation tape, and it has really good instructions for use, because we're trying to set people up for success with hydrocolloids rather than failure, which is just happening too often at this point in time. Okay, let's just, oh, that's meant to just show you. Oh, it looks like that's not going to work, unfortunately. Oh, here we go. Just showing you what's in the packet. So we've got an insert that is in 5 languages just to explain all the ins and outs. We've got the 6 plasters that are individually wrapped and sterile, and then the 6 pieces of fixation tape that are pre-cut. So this isn't a new product. I've been selling this on my e-commerce platform for, I don't know, 4 years or something. It's quite popular among my podiatry colleagues. We sell it at a couple of the podiatry suppliers and sports medicine suppliers. And yeah, to my understanding, it's the only product with fixation tape. So just wrapping up on the 5 stages of the blister process and what product recommendations we need to be making at each stage. It is hydrocolloids for de-roofed, antiseptic for the 2 open blisters, an island dressing, as in just like a Band-Aid, is applicable to intact, torn and de-roofed blisters, although a hydrocolloid is preferable on the de-roofed. And across all 5 stages, we need to be implementing a really good prevention. Why is that? Because when we put our dressing on our blister, we haven't eliminated the shear. We think we have because we think it's all about rubbing. But when we realise that it's all about shear, we need to do more to reduce the shear that's occurring under there in spite of the dressing. That's the only way that you truly take the pain out of blisters and you stop that blister from getting worse as your patient puts their shoes back on and keeps going. We're going to dig into prevention because I feel like there's a real opportunity there for pharmacy. But before I do, what I want to do is show you where friction fits into the friction blister story, because this is really quite amazing. The problem with the word friction is it is a word that has 2 not just different meanings, but 2 opposite meanings. It means both rubbing and the force that resists rubbing. Now, the problem is when we use the wrong definition, it leads to several misconceptions. It makes people think that blisters are a superficial to deep wear injury. In fact, that describes an abrasion. A blister is a tear under the skin surface, so they're 2 completely different injuries. It's true that once we've got the blister tear, it is quite easy for that blister roof to slough right off because it's lost its underlying support, and that will leave an abrasion-looking injury. But the injury was the intraepidermal tear, or the tear underneath the skin surface. It makes people think that blisters are a thermal burn, in that things rub so much and get so hot we get a burn blister. But research shows it just doesn't get that hot in the shoe even when we're exercising, even on a hot day. And also we know that we can get blisters in icy cold conditions too. It makes people think that calluses are a good prevention. Now, this could be true if we were talking about abrasions, because we would just have to wear through more corneum until we got to the raw skin, but calluses are far from preventive. And it makes people think that hydrocolloids are a good prevention, but as we've said, they don't eliminate the shear. Shear is still happening under there, so they are somewhat effective. The problem is when they're not effective, it often leads to a worsening of the blister situation because it'll rip the whole blister roof off with it when we take it off. The correct definition to use is the more scientific definition, which is the force that resists rubbing. So in this simplified picture, we've got like a bone. Let's say that's the bone of the metatarsal head, which is the bone under the ball of the foot, and the skin surface. What you need to know is the bones move within our foot every step that we take. That's completely normal. What doesn't happen is the bone and the skin don't move in perfect unison with one another. This happens. Why does the skin stay stationary? Because of the force of friction. So friction, which is the red arrow here, is just the force that is stopping the skin surface from moving in sync with the bone. And the result is all of this tissue in between stretches and distorts, which is what that was. So friction is not the rubbing. Friction is the force that stops the rubbing or prevents the rubbing, at least for a period of time. Shear is normal. it happens with every step that we take. Our skin is quite able to deal with a lot of it. But if it happens too frequently or to too high a magnitude, that's when we can get the tear of the blister injury. So the fundamental factors contributing to blister causing shear are moving bone in the presence of high friction force, keeping the skin surface stationary, and everything in between, stretching and distorting. We've known this for a long, long time. I'm going to spare you guys the research, but there's been nothing that has proposed an alternative hypothesis or disproved the fact that blisters are caused by repetitive shear. And yet these rubbing misconceptions persist. So it's really quite an awkward situation, but it's probably starting to make sense why you think it's all about rubbing. All right, let's dig into prevention. Now, every blister I see, I have this chart in the back of my mind. I'm looking for all the opportunities for prevention and trying to figure out what's going to work best in this situation at this part of the foot. This is where pharmacy fits in. So pharmacists sell products that reduce the magnitude of the shear, and most products do work in this way. So if we look at the middle row on the far right, spread shear, which is the adhesive materials, this is the one we've already spoken about: hydrocolloids, dressings, moleskin, tapes. These are the things we stick to the skin and we eliminate the rubbing on the skin. But remember, it's not about rubbing, it's about shear. So shear is still happening under there. They are somewhat effective, but most people who believe that blisters are caused by rubbing have an overinflated understanding of how effective these products are for preventing blisters. So if I can give you any piece of advice, it would be lower your expectations about how effective these are. These are certainly not the pinnacle. Some people, this is all they need to do. There are plenty of us out there, though, where we need way better than this. The next one is materials that absorb shear. A good example of this is gel toe protectors. So the gel undergoes shear. So this material here, see, it's all squishy and it undergoes shear. Now, if there's shear happening in the gel, there's less shear that needs to happen in the skin. So gel toe protectors, in my opinion, are fabulous at blister prevention. Cushioned insoles like Spenco 3mm insoles have been proven to be effective. Pelitech blister pads absorb a bit of shear, and also loose packed wool, which is just that fleece that you sort of shove down under your sock. I think that works also by the fibres gliding over one another. There's not a lot of sort of commentary about how wool works, but that's my best understanding of how it works. And then finally, we can reduce friction force. Now, everything that we've got here on this little corner of the graph of the chart is aiming to free the skin up to move in sync with the bone at an earlier moment. What that means is we are encouraging rubbing. There's two ways to do it, and they're quite easy to understand. If we think about pressure, do this again. The harder we press, the bigger the shear. The softer we press, the smaller the shear, because our fingertip can't help but slip and slide across the back of our hand. So any way that you can reduce pressure, like donut pads, toe props for apical blisters on the tip of the toe, cushioning materials, these things can reduce pressure. Podiatrists do things with orthotics and stretching and stuff. So that's reducing pressure. Now, the other way we can do it is we can use materials to make things more slippery. Imagine I had a big blob of Vaseline there and I was pressing really hard. What you wouldn't see is big shear like that. It would look like I'm hardly pressing, even if I was pressing real hard, because we've made it so slippery that my fingertip just can't get purchase on the skin to create any shear. So this is how lubricants work. Theoretically, this is how antiperspirants and powders would work, because we know dry skin has a lower coefficient of friction compared to moist skin. The only thing is research shows that they are ineffective as blister prevention strategies. And the final one, which I rate very highly, is Engo patches, and we're going to dig into them a little bit more very soon. But before I leave you on this coefficient of friction thing, which, remember, this whole corner of the graph is all looking to encourage rubbing. One way is to reduce the coefficient of friction. This graph shows the coefficient of friction. Let's not get too technical here. I just want you to think of this graph as indicating how big shear is. So the one thing you'll notice here is shear peaks in a state of static friction. That means the skin's not moving. Look what happens when we get rubbing. Rubbing has happened sooner. It's happened here. And therefore, that has meant that shear has peaked at a lower level. So not only is rubbing not necessarily the problem, it is often the solution. And I realize that that is a massive head spin for most people. All right, let's dig into the two preventions which I rate the highest out of all of them. Basically, if I don't have access to these at ultramarathon, I'm severely hamstrung with how effective and helpful I can be. So they are Engo blister patches, which probably nobody in pharmacy has heard of, and gel toe protectors, which probably everyone already sells in their pharmacy. So let's go through each one. So Engo patches, this is how they work. This graph shows the coefficient of friction over various levels of moisture. So on the x-axis, we've got moisture from 0%, which is dry, to 100%, which is saturated, and then all levels of moist in between. PTFE is the blue line. That is the Engo patches. Engo patches are a PTFE film with an adhesive backing. PTFE is better known as Teflon because that's what Teflon is made out of, and it's just widely known to be the lowest coefficient of friction material out there. So not only, the two things that we can notice here is not only is the Engo patches coefficient of friction much lower than the other in-shoe materials that we often use, but it remains at that very low level from across all moisture levels, from bone dry through all the levels of moist up to saturated. And that's no mean feat. You can use them on all types of shoes. They come in 4 patch sizes or shapes and 4 retail packs. So we've got the heel patches for the back of the heel. The rectangles are good for the flat insole, flat areas of the insole, and the ovals are great for pretty much anywhere. Let's have a look at the pros and cons. There is no single product that is good for every blister in every blister situation, so it always helps to have an understanding of the pros and cons. The good things about Engo patches is they minimize friction levels big time across all degrees of moisture. They are very thin, so they don't adversely affect shoe fit, which is a big thing. 0.38 of a millimeter is how thick they are. And yet they're so very durable, so they'll last months. We can trim them to size and shape with scissors. They're applicable to most blister sites. One area you can't use them is blisters between the toes because there's just literally no part of the shoe that you can stick it to that goes between there. And they're an example of targeted friction management. When we're reducing friction, we really need to just reduce it where it's a problem. And that is anywhere that you've had a blister before, because blister history is the biggest indicator of where you're going to get your next blister. So if you want to prevent a blister, you need to try and prevent them right from the get-go and not wait for them to happen. And your clue is you've had these blisters before. So you know where you're most likely to get them. So if you want to prevent them, you can use Engo patches to target these areas preventively. This is in contrast to the way people use lubricants, at least in athletic situations. They tend to put lubricants over their whole foot. Friction provides traction, and traction is necessary for the foot in the shoe. Otherwise, everything's a bit too slippery slidey. So targeted friction management is the best way to go with friction management, and that's why I also love the Engo patches so much. The other downside with the lubricants is friction levels rise after about an hour and a half, so you have to reapply them. And also they retard the adhesion of dressings and tapes. So if you've already got a blister, it can sort of make the the dressing come off, which is not ideal. Now, the downsides are they need a very dry surface to stick to. So if the shoe's wet, it just won't stick. If it also needs a clean surface to stick to. If you use powders and lubricants and they are contaminating the shoe surface, they won't stick as well as they should. Waterlogging can make them peel off. So river crossings, putting your shoes in the washing machine are going to probably make the patches come off. And for back of heel patches, just like a heel grip, we need to sort of make sure our heel doesn't catch the top of the patch and drag it down. We do need to sort of put our fingertips over the top of the patch and glide our heel over that area. Okay, let's see if this video works. Oh, yeah. You only need to press it 10 times. These are the oval patches. You can use them for clawed toes at the top of the toe box. Really good. They work best if they're interfacing with a sock rather than bare skin. The rectangles for the insole. So Engo patches also are not a new product. I've been using Engo patches for probably over a decade. And I represent this product in Australia and in New Zealand and some other parts of the world. They are easily our biggest seller. So for our next biggest bestseller, for every one unit that we sell of them, we sell 7 Engo packs. So they really are by far our most popular product because they work so well. So that you can use them on all types of shoes. All right, moving on to gel toe protectors. As I said, most pharmacies have these. So let's talk about how they work. They absorb shear brilliantly. They cushion as well, so they have a double effect. They're almost always comfortable because they're kind of soft and squishy. That's not to say everyone likes them. Some people just can't handle the feeling of things between their toes, so they're not going to get on too well with these. And they're applicable to most toe blisters, not all of them. I wouldn't use these for blisters under the toenail, but yeah, most toe blisters. Downsides are significant. So we need to understand we can't put gel on open skin. If the skin is bleeding or weeping, then we need to have the dressing on or the hydrocolloid on first and then apply the gel, because the gel is occlusive. It won't deal with those fluids and it will just macerate the skin. And also gels are quite bulky, so you can usually only fit 1 or maybe 2 per foot because the toe box is a pretty confined area. This is our brand. I sell them in 4 sizes. I've just found that over the years it's necessary. To my understanding, there's not another brand that sells them in 4 sizes. Our gel also is a little bit thicker and a bit more resilient than other brands. We need that in 3 situations. Big toes, big forces, so we need a more resilient gel. Fixed flexion deformities like hammer toes, and pinch blisters of the little toe. You know those curly little toes that kind of sit under and you get that ridge of hard skin? That almost always blisters if you increase your activity levels all of a sudden. Okay, let me show you this video. The most common mistake people make, that one's not going to work, is they cut their gel toe protectors too small. So, I mean, they'll get a length of it and they want to get as many devices out of it as possible. So they just end up cutting it too short and it ends up just sort of covering the bony prominence, and that's about it. And what happens is because there's so much give in it, it just sort of skews and it works its way to either forward or backwards and not where you need it. So the key is to cut the gel toe protector a little bit longer than the toe to start with. And then this video shows you how to trim the corner so that when you pull the gel toe protector on, you can pull it down further onto the toe without it bunching up between the toes. And that gives you the best protection and the best chance that that gel toe protector is going to stay put no matter how long you're wearing it. So we've got a link to this video on the back of our packaging. Again, we're just trying to set people up for success with gels. Yeah. So they're my 2 bang for buck preventions. Basically, if you have people in need, so if you have people that are blister prone, if they partake in blister heavy activities like netball, if they have significant deformities like hammer toes or bunions, if they wear less than ideal shoes, or if it's just important that they have access to top shelf preventions that is going to maximize the chance that they're going to get relief from their blister or prevent it in the first place, then in my opinion, these two products are where you would start. And if you think about it, most pharmacies are almost halfway there already because you're selling gel toe protectors. Having said that, there are more products out there that I rate that I think are very good. So if you'd like to learn more about them and perhaps get a refresher on all the things we've spoken about today, you can take our free pharmacy-specific online self-paced short course. You need to access it through that URL. It's a hidden course because it's for pharmacy only. I mean, I would have loved to have gone through all of the preventions, but we just sort of don't have the time today. And probably everyone's feeling a little bit like this. The last 30 minutes has been a lot. I do apologise. I did say it was going to be a wild ride. But just to recap, if there's one slide that I need you to remember that I think will help you most in your pharmacy, it's this one. It outlines which products are required across the 5 stages of the blister process. I'm pleased to say that we're represented by Helen Sykes and the team at Powerhouse Retail Distribution. So if you've got any questions about our product range, you can get in touch with Helen anytime. Okay, we are out of time, but I've promised to go through some questions. So let me just get into those now. Should we let them dry out? No, you don't want them to scab. That's why we need to use either an island dressing or a hydrocolloid. So letting them dry out is not good. A scab is not healed skin. It's just dried up goo from the wound and your raw blister base is still under there. The scab is brittle. It can easily sort of dislodge and you're still back at square one. How to prevent in longer distances? I mean, I gave you my best 2 preventions for ultramarathon, Bruce. So it would be these 2. But this isn't going to cover all blister areas. So, for example, I would, for apical blisters or blisters under the toenail, we need to maybe use toe props or figure out what's going on. Is this happening at the end of the shoe? So we need to do our laces up tighter. But that's where I would start, Bruce. Prevention for long distance walkers, same thing. Now, every time we're talking about prevention, it's important to realise that every part of our foot needs a slightly different angle to prevention. It's really going to depend on where it is on their foot more than the activity. But as I said, the Engo patches and the gel toe sleeves, if you just had to pick 2, they would have the most utility. Does older or younger skin blister more? I would say, you probably say older skin, but I'm talking elderly. The reason I say that is in ultramarathon, there are a lot of older people that take part in ultramarathon in their sort of 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And from what I've gathered, and this is just my opinion because I don't know of any research on blisters across age spectrums, is that this kind of age is not any more susceptible to blisters. But then if we think about elderly, you know, it is easier to get skin tears. So, you know, when you get up into those age brackets, it's probably true. Best treatment practices and what is the projected healing time? Best treatment practices are island dressing for intact and torn. It's basically this slide. That's your treatment. Going to depend on the blister stage. What is the projected healing time? 6 weeks is the short answer. And I've got a blog post that I'll put in the chat that has a sort of a photo representation of one of my last blisters across the weeks. So you can have a look at that. Blister prevention for ultra long trail races, been through that. Causes and treatment. The cause is shear. It's not heat, moisture, and friction. That is an oversimplification of the blister causing paradigm. It's not rubbing, it's repetitive shear distortion. And the fundamental factors are moving bone in the presence of high friction force. That's what creates the shear. How to prevent, especially with new shoes at the start of the school year? Nothing's different. Again, it's try not to start with the activity. Try and start with the anatomical location. So I'm going to take a wild guess and say this is a back of heel blister that we're talking about in school shoes. And in my humble opinion, it would be Engo patches are by far and away the best prevention. Update on dressings. The dressing is probably the least important part. The most important part is implementing the prevention. If you put a dressing on and you're not negating the blister causing shear enough, that blister will get worse in spite of the dressing. So I find that people overcomplicate the whole dressing thing. It's a Band-Aid or island dressing for any of the intact, torn or deroofed blisters, and then ideally for the deroofed, it's a hydrocolloid. It's as simple as that. If you want to make the biggest difference, it's implement the prevention during the treatment along with your dressing. How do we prevent them? I mean, that's how we prevent them. If you're in pharmacy and you've got a customer and you've given them all of your best products and you can't do anything more for them, refer them off to a podiatrist. We deal a lot with this whole bone movement factor. Remember, the bone movement is an important part of it. So we do orthotics and biomechanical interventions depending on the anatomical location. But there's also, you know, we can do things to increase the skin's resilience to shear, and this one's less helpful. It just means taking less steps, like not being as active. It's a bit of a cop-out in my opinion. I completely de-emphasize this, and this one tops out at a certain point, but it kind of explains why we need to break in our shoes a bit rather than pull a new pair of shoes out of the box and run a marathon. Not ideal. Our skin hasn't got used to the forces on it. In survival or military scenarios, are blisters warning signs of equipment misfit and energy waste or unavoidable costs of adaptation? They're not unavoidable. The skin doesn't have time to adapt. When it has time to adapt, it forms a callus. That's why calluses aren't protective. They are a clue that you will get a blister at this area if you increase your activity level all of a sudden. Are blisters warning signs of equipment misfit? No, we need to get more into this. We need to think more about the biomechanics of it all. So you've got gravity, the bone is moving that way during propulsion, friction force at these different interfaces is keeping everything stationary, and of course we've got ground reaction force. So you need to figure out what part of the foot you're talking about, search for that area of the foot and figure out what's the best prevention. If you need a place to start, I've got a feeling you're probably not in pharmacy, have a look at the course called Fix My Foot Blisters Fast. This is where I walk people through that are athletes how to attack each of these blisters, basically, what the best preventions are for each of these and what causes them. How do I treat blisters on the tip of my toes and arch? Tip of the toes, you need to figure out whether your laces are too loose and your foot is sliding forward and hitting the end of the shoe, or if the shoe is too small to start with. And if it's not that, then it's likely that your toes are clawing, and in that case, you need a toe prop. Based on current evidence, what's the most effective combination approach to blister prevention, materials, taping, footwear, and patient education, and how do you tailor it to different patient populations, athletes versus older adults? I don't really do much different between athletes and older adults. I give them my best preventions. But current evidence, this is a really good question. This is the current evidence base. If we were to follow evidence, we would be telling people to break in their shoes gradually, increase their mileage gradually. We'd give them some 3mm Spenco insoles, and we would say go and find some densely padded 100% acrylic socks, which basically don't exist. So that is quite limiting. One thing we wouldn't do is we wouldn't be saying anything about lubricants, because all of these have no evidence. So we wouldn't be telling them to use lubricants or tapes or pressure deflective padding like donut pads. We wouldn't even be telling them about optimized shoe fit. So, and I wouldn't be using Engo patches here, and I wouldn't be using gel toe devices because there's just no evidence for it. The only thing we have evidence against is antiperspirants and powders, and we're on the fence about double socks and paper tape. So I also did a whole section, a whole office hours on this. So if I just pop this in the where have you gone? In the chat. This is where you find the replays, and you'll notice this little slide. It's the lead slide on the presentation. How to avoid them. I mean, I think we've gone through that. The general science. So the general science is kind of outlined here. Now I do have some. So Doug Ritchie and I wrote a couple of papers that were published recently. So let me give you the links to those. And if that's a bit too heavy for you, then just watch this video, which we produced to kind of summarize it in a more of a visual way. But yeah, good question. Best bandage. That. How to avoid them, we did that. Sorry. Main causes of blisters. It's any reason why we've got bone movement and high friction force. I mean, we need to get anatomically specific. So it could be clawed toes or hammer toes. It could be arch flattening. The more our arch flattens, the more the ball of the foot translates across the insole. Yeah, I mean, there's just too many. You'd need to say what's the main cause of blisters, and then give me an anatomical location, and then I can tell you. Neil asks why. That's why. Neil, shear is why. How to prevent them? We've done that. How to get blister plasters to stay on. Good one, Nat. First of all, the fixation tape. Second of all, you'd probably use, if your patient is very sweaty and you need an adhesive enhancer. I mean, there are a few adhesive enhancers around, but Fry's Balsam is a good one. But I also have these from America, which is a compound benzoin tincture ampoules, and they are fabulous. They're stronger than the Gold Cross Fry's Balsam that you can get here. Okay, guys, we are almost out of time, but because we've got a few people on the call, I'll be happy to, I'm going to unmute you, Erica, just in case you've got a question. Sorry, I just muted you before. Oh, looks like I can't. If anyone's got a question, just type it in the chat box or turn your mic on, and I'll be happy to answer it.
So I was just going to touch on Tom's Blister Shield powder. But you
Tom's, yep.
Yeah, but you did touch on the role of powders a moment ago. But up to that point, you hadn't mentioned it. And the feedback from my clients is, of course, it's very helpful, along with other measures.
Yeah, so the research to date shows that powders are not effective as a blister prevention strategy. Having said that, these pieces of research were done before the invention of Two Tom's Blister Shield powder. So they were done on cornstarch powders and talc powders. Those powders, they absorb a little bit of moisture, but then once they absorb the moisture, they kind of become an abrasive paste. And so that ends up being not helpful. The difference with 2 times Blister Shield powder is that's a PTFE powder. So it's made out of PTFE. It doesn't absorb moisture. It is literally a dry lubricant. So it works a little bit differently. Now, Farina Hashmi and colleagues did, I think it was Farina, at least her team, did some research on a number of products, and they were looking at 2 predictors of blisters, and they found it impacted on one but not the other. And the one it didn't impact on was, I think, the rate of temperature increase, and that was thought to be predictive of blisters. So it's kind of not quite, we're not quite sure about the 2 times Blister Shield powder. But of all of them, if I was to pick a powder, it'd be that one. Good question, Erica. Any other questions?
Oh, the fact that you can use a combination of things, not just one or the other. Combination is usually the way to go.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, it looks like that might be a wrap. So thank you very much for joining me. Again, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. If you are in pharmacy, feel free to reach out to Helen. And it has been an absolute pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.